A massively successful charity raked in a load of money for its founders.
Teens were lured in with voluntourism and cult-like practices.
And then there were the death threats, bribery and corruption in Kenya.
Plus, the ultimate hypocrisy with Hershey's chocolate.
We're doing a full recap of the white saviors on this episode of So Much Crime,
So Little Time.
Jeff, you know when your back is really sore and you can't move?
Yes.
You know what is a really good use of time when you were stuck laying on your sofa for the full day?
Sounds like you're speaking from personal experience.
I am. Current and personal experience. But my favorite thing that I've done today in the midst of all of this pain is go to patreon.com/so much crime, so little time, and joined as one of their members.
It's a great idea. If you do that, you can listen to episodes early. You get fun bonus content, outtakes. And I think what I hear from a lot of our supporters is they just like that good feeling of being a part of the So Much Crime, So Little Time community and giving some support to the show. So patreon.com/so much crime, so little time.
We'll tell you where your money goes when we spend it. Welcome to So Much Crime, So Little Time. I'm Dee.
And I'm Jeff. And before we start, just want to give you a warning.
Warning.
This episode is going to have spoilers for The White Saviors. We're going to discuss the whole series here.
If you haven't listened yet, check out our preview episode on this show. It's the one before this one in your feed.
And we'll also give you a link to The White Saviors in our show notes.
Let's remind everyone a little bit about the podcast in general. It was released in 2021. The host is Olusola Adeogun. There are 5 episodes and an update episodes. So Jeff tells me 5 + 1 is 6. So let's just go with that. There are, in fact, 6 episodes. And they range from, 20 minutes to 45. Nothing huge here. But what is the story that's being told here?
So in our preview episode, we talked about the beginning of this story, and we were introduced to Craig Kielburger and his older brother, Mark. Back in 1995, Craig was inspired after learning about a boy from Pakistan who had been sold into slavery, child slavery, at the age of 4. And he had escaped from that, but he then became an advocate against child slavery, and then that boy was assassinated when he was 12. So that was back in 1995. Craig at the time was also 12 years old, and he launched a group called Free the Children that was designed to raise money, help send supplies, build schools, basically like children helping children. But it seemed like the Kielburger family, was maybe using this just to sort of get rich themselves and pocketing a lot of the money that should have gone to help children. So in 2020, after about 25 years, this all became a major scandal over how what was then known as the We charity used its money. So that's what we talked about in our preview. And now let's talk about the series as a whole. Dee,
Oof.
Where should we start?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. I have so many feelings. I have so much anger. I have so much frustration. And I have so much love for our host, Olusola Adeogun. Olusola Adeogun. I'm so sorry, Olusola. Let's blame the pain in my back. I know in the preview I mentioned that I really enjoyed listening to his voice. I thought he was a really good storyteller. I continue to think that was maybe, was a big thing in this show that I continue to love. God, how do I feel about it, Jeff? I don't know. Do you have like a good synopsis here of how you felt about it? Because I have so many feelings, obviously, as per usual. But yeah, let me give you a chance to speak for a sec.
Yeah, this definitely made me angry about that sort of premise. Like, in a way, this is just your sort of typical scam story, right? Like people pretending to do something really good in the world, and they're just sort of like taking people's time and money and misleading them or abusing their trust.
But it's not.
What? What do you mean?
It's not the typical one.
It
felt worse. Because there's so many people involved that don't give a shit.
Well, like the scale of this, I think, is hard to fathom. And I almost think they sort of glossed over just how Like, I mean, this was a global thing that had like the big, I mean, we talked about this in the preview. Like this is like the Queen and the Dalai Lama and like I mean, the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and like like just think of a major name of somebody, Demi Lovato, Madonna, like they were at some point, Oprah, they're involved in this, which is, it's hard to sort of fathom just how everywhere this was and how much money we're talking about, how much attention and publicity there was.
And it's not even about the money. Like we heard in, oh sugar, what episode was it where we heard about Reed Cowan? Was it episode 5?
That was
I think
5,
it was
yeah.
episode 5, yeah. Like, so for context, Reed Cowan, his son Wesley Cowan died in an accident on a swing set when he was like 4. He got in touch with the Uyghur organization because he also wanted to basically set up a charity in Wesley's honor and try to help people in need. And instead of trying to help him, they were like, how about you join forces with us? We will take the money in Wesley's name. We'll put it to action. And, you know, you can be involved, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, Reed Cowan was like in and he helped. And he was more or less duped. Like there was this insane story about him being brought over to Kenya to the opening of a school that seemingly was opened. Yeah. Named for his son. There was a plaque on it. There was a whole ceremony. There was children out like performing this entire thing. And he basically finds out that it was like a Velcro plaque. Like 2 weeks earlier, another person had been over with a different plaque on the same school with the same performers, the same big hoo-ha, making the main person who has raised all this money feel good. But that school isn't there in Wesley Cohen's name now. It's just not. Yeah. Like, how can people, and like Reed Cohen spoke about this, and he spoke out and he said, I'm asking for anyone involved and everyone involved to open up your accounts, show us what money you gave to them so we can basically prove that this is a scandal. Like, please, everyone come together. This is your time to advocate for all these people you're claiming to care about. None of them did it. So all those people that you named, not only were they involved in it, but when they had the opportunity to stand up and rectify the issue, they went silent. That's worse.
Yes. And I think my point about the scale of it is that I think that Reed Cohen story is a good one because it's a terrible story, but that was in episode 5. And prior to that, we'd gotten stories of different kind of scams and it's just this house of cards that's just built on one type of shady thing after another, and there's just piles of them. I mean, in that same episode, we heard about Justin Trudeau and his family getting these like speaking fees and free travel and what amounted to like $500,000 for basically doing nothing, and like that was one episode. There was the other episode where they had these volunteers, these teenagers going to Africa or other parts of the world to like dig wells and build schools and giving them like vitamin B12 shots just to like keep them working and keep them happy. And I mean, there was just so
weird.
That was weird. But then also, I mean, just if all this had been about was the fact that this was arguably a group that was established to fight child slavery, and then they worked with these companies that used child labor and child slavery, like the Hershey example, like the Hershey chocolate example.
But even the hotels, there was that story of one of the volunteers who went over, I think, to India, and there was in fact a child working in the hotel that they stayed at. Like, and everyone was like, well, that's just what happens here. And it's like, what? Like this, like disassociate from the 5-star hotel you're staying at then.
So I wanted to talk about that story for a second, because I have a lot of sort of moral outrage about a lot of the things we heard about. That story, though, I had like a weird issue with that story. That story, so I felt like overall, this was a podcast that felt well-researched, well-sourced. We heard about the sources. We heard about when there were like a number of sources or people who would only speak off the record, but like we got a little bit of the behind the scenes from Canada Land, from Jesse Brown, from the kind of the people who put this together. And I thought that was well done. That story to me felt like one of those sort of like looking for outrage anecdotes that is hard to tell how representative of the whole it was. And I wanted to offer the context of, like, I've worked for a nonprofit a couple of times in my career. My first job out of college was working for a big nonprofit, a big national nonprofit that had been around for decades. And I went in very sort of idealistic and thinking, like, I'm going to go out and do good in the world, and very quickly realized, oh, this is a business. Like, the reason that this nonprofit has grown to this scale, has lasted as long as it did, was because it operates like a business. And that means sometimes making some decisions that don't really seem to be in line with the sort of purely idealistic mentality that the people who coming out of college and joining this organization may have. And at the time, when I was fresh out of college, I got disillusioned with that real quickly. And I quit pretty early on. I didn't even make it a year in that organization. And most of my friends, I had several friends from college who also joined the same organization and didn't last very long. And looking back on that now, having worked for both nonprofits and for-profit companies, I realized, like, I guess I'm a little bit more cynical now, but I've also worked for a company that had a nonprofit wing and also a for-profit wing. And I have worked across both sides of that line and realized, like, sometimes that is fuzzy. And sometimes you can have the best intentions with that nonprofit. I say that to maybe call out that one story as maybe being a little bit misleading. At the same time, having worked for a company that is both, has a nonprofit side and a for-profit side, in my experience there, we at least had some sort of, like, moral backbone. The people that I have worked with and the people that were trying to make sure that those two lines didn't get blurred. And we did right by the nonprofit. We stayed true to the mission of the nonprofit. It is still a business. Like, it had to at least do what it set out to do and stay afloat. But does that make sense? Like, that, I feel like there is a little bit of context that was maybe left out of that one story.
Of course, I get that, but I think if that was the one of the only stories that we were hearing, maybe. But, like, I think it's just another example of how hypocritical the entire organization was.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And look, I know some people, like, go out with this idealistic view, but you have to work within the community and within the culture that you are, trying to help or raising funds for or whatever. And I do feel like in Ireland, I'm sure in America as well, like, we view certain countries and certain cultures in a certain way because we don't understand it, like, we're not living in it. And I do feel like there's elements of what I'm trying to say is like when I would have been working in India, I saw some of the, like, discipline used was not discipline that we in Ireland or in America you would use anymore with the children. And I remember the feeling of, like, feeling sick to my stomach, and myself and the two other teachers that I was working with feeling that too. And we spoke to, like, the kind of the leaders of our organization, and they were a little bit like, we are here to model good and effective teaching methodologies. We are not here to usurp the teachers in this organization. We're also not here to judge the teachers in this organization. Like, every culture is different. And that's a really hard thing to, like, grapple with when you're working in the sector. And, like, God, my time there was so tiny, like, in the grand scheme of things. But, like, I kind of understand what you mean about that story in particular. Like, we're kind of missing a lot of it just felt like a bit of a throwaway story. Like, let's be annoyed at this one small thing, when I feel like they could have definitely spent more time. I think this may be my one gripe with this podcast, is I wanted more. I think, like, I wanted more about every story. I wanted a little bit more detail, and I don't know whether they kept it really short as a way of intriguing people into their podcasts, and I totally respect that.
Sure.
But I feel like they could have had some bonus episodes with more like content and more detail. I just felt like we were missing out on half the story sometimes. Does that make, like with Reed Count, for example, basically it says like none of the people that he asked to come out and speak up and advocate did, and he got absolutely slaughtered. He was left out to dry, like
Yeah.
castigated, judged by the online community as well as like the media, and so I don't know. It just feels like I wanted to hear even more about that. Like, what about Reed Cowan after all of this? Like, how does he feel right now?
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I think you're right. I think there were times where I wanted a little bit more depth from some of these stories, and I would have liked maybe. I mean, yeah, this was a real short podcast. It really was 5 episodes. That 6th episode truly was a bonus episode. It was sort of like here's what happened after this came out, or here's what we might do next. It wasn't really more to the story. I wanted to though just say one other thing about the point about the child laborers in the hotel. The other thing that came from that episode and that story was talking about these volunteers or the voluntourism trips where they would go and they like dig wells or build schools or whatever. And the woman who was talking about that was saying how like they might, spend a whole day digging a well and then find out that they were like doing it wrong or building in the wrong place or something like that. And so I asked my son, so I didn't want to name the companies that I worked for, but I will say this one because it's a positive story. So he has done a bunch of volunteer work for Habitat for Humanity. Mm-hmm. And this is something I actually always wondered this because they have people who are the same age as the people in the story who go, all over and build houses. And I've always wondered about this because there's a lot of groups that do that go and they build houses or schools or things like that. And I always wondered because like you're sending people who maybe like aren't carpenters, aren't builders, like are they really actually doing a good job? Or are they sort of getting in the way or making things worse? And so this is, again, anecdotal, one person's perspective. But I asked him, I spent a few minutes just talking to him this week about the kinds of things he does when he goes out and he builds, because he has built houses for people. And he's like, yeah, like they give us jobs that we're capable of doing. And there's someone there to make sure we're doing it right. And they don't give, and this is again, just his experience, but like he's never given a job that is beyond his skill set or without the proper sort of scaffolding and training and support from someone more experienced. And that is maybe just a sign of a more well-run organization. And that, like, to me, that's part of the frustration here is this just seems like a terribly run organization by people who don't have the best interests of their actual like mission in mind, or the people who are working for them or volunteering for them in mind. They seem to just be purely interested in growing the organization and making money.
Yeah, I feel like a terribly run organization is such a bizarre, description here. I feel like it's a really well run organization for the focus of getting as much money to the Kielburgers as possible. Like, I mean, the whole thing is so planned. Like when you hear that they were never drawing a salary from the charitable side of things. So they were always volunteers.
The Kielburgers, the
basically,
Kielburger brothers didn't
sorry.
actually work for the company.
So basically, if they ever get found, like, if the company ever gets found, like, liable for anything, like, it won't go to them. To be honest, it's a stroke of genius. They're
right.
also, they have a chief of staff, like they have staff helping them. They have fired the board. How can a volunteer fire the board? I would like to know. Who knows? Even some of the people being interviewed were like, whoa, like, does that mean it's us? Like, does that mean it's us that it comes to?
No, you're right. This is the most
and we saw that even with the Kenya episode, with the crimes in Kenya. Like, they orchestrate things. Really evil and heinous things. But what's bizarre to me is nobody seems to care. Like, how does nobody care? I don't understand this. They never have to answer any questions. They skirt around any question they're ever asked in any like court case or anything, any press conference. They skirt around a question. They always give these like floundering answers. They never answer directly, even when they're told they never answer. But the public are basically like, leave them alone.
Yeah. I mean, we could start talking about other examples of people who have managed to leave a trail of destruction.
God, let's not do that.
But
What I would also like to say is, why is the US taking Canada's sloppy seconds, Jeff?
it's what we specialize in.
Seriously.
We don't care. Like, come make your money here, I guess.
It's wild. Like, sorry, I'm going very high pitched. I think I'm going higher pitched than usual because I'm like outraged by this.
I mean, isn't that what it says in the bottom of the Statue of Liberty? Like, give us your scams, your charlatans, your fake charities. That's the poem, right? That's how that poem goes.
I don't fucking know. I'm not from here.
You didn't come through Ellis Island.
No.
You didn't come over on a boat.
Not quite. And I suppose like this all goes back to like the problem with putting people or organizations on a pedestal. Like what we have to remember, and I said this in the preview episode, and I still believe it in some small facet, but Craig was 12 when this all started.
Yeah.
He grew up being taught how to do this. And he was curated. He became an adult. And surely he knows right from wrong. But he was put on a pedestal from when he was 12. And it's this idea of like this, what they spoke about in episode 3, I think, the halo effect. Where, you know, companies want to look fantastic. So they buy into this. And he has these speeches and apparently they're motivating where it's basically like, we need to rewrite your message so that all you're about is helping people. Like if we do that, like your organization will run better. People will like you more. Like your workers will like you more. And I'm like, he's actually like, is nobody inferring here what he's saying? Which is like, let's just manipulate everyone.
Yeah.
Like that's what he's saying. Like there's nothing motivational about that. It's like, here's a way of telling people that you are really amazing and that you are so giving. And let's twist your message from profit to this and we will help you. Like, it's akin to like greenwashing or rainbow washing. Like,
that's exactly, that's the right metaphor. Yeah.
But it's blatant. Like he's not hiding this. He's saying this in like motivational speeches. And I know we're on an audio medium, but I'm doing my air quotes there. Why is he allowed to get away with this?
It's saying the quiet part out loud. That's what it seems like he's been doing that for decades. You said something though that I want to jump back to. Talk about how when he started this, he was 12, and something we talked about in the preview that ended up actually, I think, not being what I expected from the rest of us. I thought we'd get more about his parents, his mother, and kind of how a 12-year-old was possibly doing this. And we didn't really get that. I think we kind of quickly jumped to mostly stuff that happened while he was an adult in the more recent years. But that's still a mystery that I feel like needs exploring, because I don't believe we really know who he is or what his kind of deal is. Like, is he a fully formed person? Is he kind of a front or a shell of a person? And there's this whole, like, you know, kind of Godfather behind the scenes pulling the strings that we don't know about, or we didn't get about really here. You know, we heard about his brother who's much older than him.
We heard about how his parents, retired school teachers, have like what, 25 million property or something?
Yeah, but we didn't really get the sort of machinations of the family, like the inner workings of the family.
Machinations.
You like that word?
Yeah, I know. I wonder, is that because of the lawsuit that came against Saturday Night something?
Against the reporter and the magazine that published an article on them. Yeah, I mean, so we heard about this. I think, was this in the bonus episode where we heard about how this podcast had like a libel suit based off the trailer
before it came out. Yeah,
before episode 1 came out,
trying to silence everyone.
Yeah, like they didn't even know what the content was. They just like a preemptive libel lawsuit.
Well, they had your man, is it Jesse Brown, is that his name?
Yeah, Jesse Brown.
They had like him, a private investigator on him. They were trying to find out like his 8-year-old son's name and find him in like what school he was in and stuff. Like that's so scary.
That's like gangster mob stuff. That's
Yeah. I'm like,
yeah. Anyway, this made me mad. Part of what made me mad too, that we haven't said. Again, having worked for nonprofits that I felt good about, and also, I mean, this comes up every time that there's like a tragedy and you're looking for somebody to give money to, and you wonder who are the good organizations like this, and it's so hard to know, and sometimes that means I end up not giving money or time because it's because there are people like this out there who are bad actors and they ruin
yeah.
it for others. They take a good thing and they make you mistrustful.
Yeah.
Like if I can't trust Oprah, well, I know I can't trust Oprah. If I can't trust the Dalai Lama, who do you trust?
I do feel like we go down a cynical route in life if that's where we go. We try and do a little bit of research, and if you're giving, you have to try and trust who you're giving to. I don't feel like that's what I'm getting from this episode. What I'm getting is, why don't people care? It's like it's the halo effect, like the halo washing that people are okay with, even when it comes to themselves or organizations. Like, let's continue to support this organization when we've seen so many red flags. When the independent agency, I can't remember what it's called, that looks into charities is flagging this charity as someone who has done the most, what was it called, backwashing that they've ever seen before, when they're funneling money from the charity into the private organization and back again. Like, it's all this backwashing of money. Like, nobody cares. And I think that's what I'm taking from this is, like, if you're going to give to an organization, it's up to you to do a bit of research and to trust the organization, and that's all you can do. But the organizations involved here they know about this scandal and they're okay with it. And that's what I think we need to focus on here. That's what I'm taking from it.
How do you evaluate a charity?
Reddit? No, I'm joking. I don't know, Jeff. I've had the same issue as you've had previous, when you were saying, like, sometimes it ends up that you don't give because you don't know who to trust. So I don't know. I think I'd love to have a cleaner answer. I just think, like, doing a little bit of due diligence, like a little bit of research beforehand. When we're at home in Ireland, like, there's charities there that I know and trust that have been established for many a year, but there isn't a question mark over them. The like of Bernardo's in Ireland, who deal with, like, children in poverty. The like of the Laura Lynn Foundation in Ireland, who are basically a respite and a hospice for children with terminal illnesses. These kind of organizations where you can see the work they're doing. And in Ireland, like, it's a smaller place, so, like, you just know more. You know more about these things. You hear more on the street about them. The thing with Canada, the thing with the US is, like, it's so big, like, news gets filtered.
Yeah.
So that's my answer for you there, which is not really much of an answer.
Well, I think it is tricky. I think, and I mean, this is exactly what happened with this charity, but I think here people often look for like a spokesperson that they feel like they can trust, someone who serves as a proxy, which is exactly what, Oprah has made a kind of a career doing, but it's not that different from what, Demi Lovato was doing or what the Dalai Lama was doing.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's difficult.
So what I did after I listened to it was I looked at Reddit for some comments. I tried to look at numerous places for reviews, and Reddit was the only one I could really find, which I thought was interesting. It kind of goes back to me wondering whether, as noted in the updates, whereas if a lot of people have spoken out about this podcast, they've, like, removed their reviews or their content because they were being accosted, trolled. So I'm going to read a bad review that I found, which was actually hard to find, but I have to, like, give the disclaimer that there was very few reviews in general. So the first one was, I'm only on episode 2, but I'm finding it very repetitive and disjointed and hard to follow. They just seem to be replaying clips of various events over and over again and not really getting into the meat of the story, hoping it improves. And someone responded basically being like, I'm guessing you're familiar with the news story. I don't think the focus was ever going to be on the scandal with Trudeau, if that's what you meant by the meet. I vaguely remember Jesse Brown, Canada Land's founder, mentioning that their news tips about We Charity were all over the map. So I think they will be jumping topics each episode to cover the vast breadth of We's shadiness. The pod might just not be for you. And the responder was like, not so much the Trudeau story, but I'm having a hard time getting to what did they actually do specifically? What, if any, charges have been laid? How does this impact the victim group? It's just going on and on about the rallies and events and we taglines, sound bites. I'd like to get to what the actual impact and the story is here. I was like, this feels like a really bizarre review. Having listened to the entire podcast, I feel like they do that so much, like from the get-go.
I think there's some truth to that person's criticism, though. I did really enjoy this podcast. Like, to me, this was a really effective podcast, and it was well told. But I do think it suffer is too strong of a word, but there's a little bit of let's just point out all these different things as like a litany of bad things that hopefully add up to painting a whole picture, which I think it did. It painted a whole picture of this being like a problematic organization, but it wasn't really centered on one specific scandal. It did jump around to different scandals. Yeah, I think there's truth. There's some truth to that criticism.
I wonder whether this would have been a podcast that would have benefited from like a long form, short form series. So this is like the synopsis short form for the masses, but also let's release like more details in whether it's bonus episodes or whatever way it was taken, so that when people want more, they get more. Because they obviously have done the research. It's not as if they haven't done it. It's just that the podcast material isn't there here.
Well, yeah, I think that's a fair point. Something we talked about when we were talking about Teacher's Pet, with Teacher's Pet, which was unusual in a way, he was essentially, Hedley Thomas was releasing the podcast in order to get more people to come and talk to him, which worked there. And I'm curious if that was
the aim here.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But like, I think this is the type of story where so many people have been involved over the years, and like all of these people who as teenagers, over 25 years of going and giving their time or giving their money or doing things with their own schools. There's so many people who could have participated in this, and they had a decent number, it seems like, of people.
I thought so.
But like, to your point about like it could have been expanded, they maybe could have just gone wider, deeper with an extended version.
Another one I saw here was Canada Land itself, like on the subreddit for Canada Land. They posted like, we have this new podcast out, blah, 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 this, that, and the other, and some details. And there's a few comments under being like, I'm so into this, sounds awesome, I'll definitely join the Patreon. And then there's this random one being like, the entire country has moved on from we, but not Canada Land. Shame. And I don't know whether that updates episode has like created some paranoia in my brain, but like I definitely read that being like that. This just seems like a bizarre thing. What do you mean like they've moved on? Like, how can you move on from a charity taking loads of money, taking like the youths and like, manipulating them and continuing to profit when they're claiming they're not? Like, I don't know what you want to move on from.
No, and that also, like, this also wasn't that long ago that this scandal broke. So yeah, that seems suspicious.
I have another 2 reviews to just listen to read out. Basically, great recommendation. This is such a brilliant listen. The case is made by the news team that originally exposed the corruption, and you can tell the research is watertight. The host is an expert storyteller who brilliantly explores the nuance of the corruption of We Charity. He's witty, well-paced, and the audio quality is very smooth. He really opened my eyes to world issues I only knew a little bit about, mainly charity corruption and Western charities exploiting Africa. One of my top listens this year.
That's a pretty solid review. Who was that? Who wrote that? Do you write down who wrote
Crime Pod fan.
All right, Crime Pod fan. That's a well-written review. I will say, I mean, I guess I kind of alluded to this, but we're like, this was not a world that I was unfamiliar with, but it's still, I agree with everything that person said. I think that is true.
Last one I will say, and I'm laughing at this because it starts with I'm old, so I remember when Craig came along. And I was like, wait a second. Wasn't it like 2001 or something? He was 12.
1995.
And he was 12? That's not that old. That's probably about as old as you. Well, this guy's saying he's old. What age were you in 1995?
16.
Oh. Well, this guy's saying he's old, which means you're real old. They say 19's now 16 is the handle. There was just something about him. Too practiced, too curated, a little too good to be true. I'll add this to my podcast list for sure.
Wait, I understand. What's too... Oh, Craig is too practiced.
When Craig came along, he was too practiced, too curated, a little bit too good to be true, which I feel like we touched on in our preview episode where I said like, yeah, like it all sounds great, but it does sound very scripted. And if it wasn't coming from a child, it wouldn't land. It was him being a child that made it so like special and unique.
Yeah, and we heard several clips of Craig as a 12 or presumably like 12, 13-year-old from those early days. And each time it stood out of how sort of unnatural seeming it was. There was something false about his inflection, it just felt off.
Mm-hmm. He doesn't even know how to play cards.
That's so sad.
Do you reckon he knows now?
I mean, he knows how to probably count money, and
that's the same thing.
It's not the same thing. All right, Dee.
All right. Are we recommending? Oh, were we on the same page there? Is that what we were saying?
Would you recommend this one?
I would recommend this one. I will recommend this one to friends.
Wait, you'd recommend this podcast even though there was no murder?
Murder. Well, I'm sure there was murders on the side. I mean, in Kenya, it sounds like things got pretty bad there.
Okay. Well, I would too. If anything, this could have been a couple episodes longer, and I think I still would have enjoyed it. So, this was well done.
Usually what we say. Yeah, it was well done. Before we jump into a bit about our next episode, don't forget to leave a comment on our Instagram or rate us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you got your podcasts. And spread the word. Tell a friend, tell your colleague, tell your neighbor. Tell them that this podcast is where you go when you cannot figure out what's the next true crime podcast to go to. In a world where we need a lot of escapism, escape into true crime with Jeff and Dee.
All right, Dee. So next time, we're going to escape off into the Mojave Desert. Have you been to the Mojave Desert?
I haven't.
So, for those who are unfamiliar, this is the desert that is east of Los Angeles in Southern California. So specifically, we're going to a small community of a bunch of 30-somethings who chose to live together out there in the desert. They had pretty tight-knit... Well, we're going to find out. They had a pretty tight-knit community. They may have been a little too tight-knit and sharing with each other, including maybe sharing spouses. We're going to find out about that. But anyway, the point is, one day, an outsider showed up, wasn't part of the community, and then someone, and I don't know who yet because I haven't listened to it yet, ended up dead. So this is a story about love, betrayal, murder, and a lot of bad choices. We're going to listen to a Dateline podcast, different host, a host we have not listened to before. It is called Deadly Mirage.
That's on the next So Much Crime.
So Little Time. So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of Mind Glove Media. The executive producer is Paxton Caloriso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Our theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show on your podcast app. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.